you. So first off, if you rise and listen.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Amen.
Emphasis on the liberty.
We'll start out with a roll call. Commissioners, starting on my right.
Commissioner Kemp, Commissioner Bradish, Commissioner Linscott.
Commissioner Davis presiding. So here at the table, if you would bring the mics close enough so that they can be picked up on procedures and so on. So at this point, we're in a public meeting portion of the meeting tonight. So we've done the pledge and roll call. We do have a quorum of the commissioners. Any changes in the agenda? Actually, so we do, what we're gonna do, once we get there, is to, as you saw on the agenda, there's 3 variance files that are scheduled for tonight. We're gonna take those forward to a date time certain to hear them rather than tonight. So, any other announcements by staff or, okay, commission? So part of the meeting is a consent agenda to consider the minutes of the November 7th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those? Any needed changes, corrections? Okay, then I will declare that those are complete.
Once there was a little blue.
So that concludes our consent agenda. And that takes us then into the scheduled 5:30 public hearing. So, first thing, up there on the screen, you'll see what we call our procedures. It is like a court proceeding. The process is the staff will give a report on the cases. Then answering questions from the planning commission members, clarification or questions that seem to be covered by the presentation. Then we'll open it to public testimony. And the fact that various of you have signed in, does or doesn't mean that you are set to testify. If you want to, what I'll do is call for anyone who wants to testify to stand. So you don't have, oh yeah, we do, okay. If you could move up to the podium, because then it'll be recorded, and give us your name and address for the record. And then also you'll notice there's a clock up here on the counter, and with the number of people anticipated to be testifying, let's see if we can keep it to 3 minutes. That thing will go off and tell us that 3 minutes is up, and I'll have to, I hope I don't have to remind anybody to cut their stuff off at 3 minutes. So, so the public testimony, whether or not you're for or against the amendments or whatever, then we're gonna take notes, and the planning department up here at the counter desk will be paying attention to the testimony too, and they'll give the staff opportunity to respond to some of the comments, whatever, it's up to them. And then after that's done, there is no second round of testimony. We'll just cut off the testimony, full staff and public at that point. And then it'll be, so it's closing the hearing portion, and then that'll be open to deliberation on the commission. So also, if anyone needs any assistance in participating, hearing, seeing, getting up to the podium, let us know, and we'll see how we can help you with that. Any conflicts of interest on behalf of the, or things to disclose in the commission for this case? And, okay, so based on that procedure, the first thing we'll do is to have the staff give a presentation on, oh, excuse me, we gotta deal with, yeah, they're listed in this order, but let's deal with the variances first. So we have 3 variance cases, as I said, files 0018-19 waterfront setback variance, file B002219 front yard setback, waterfront setback, and file B0023-19 side yard setback variance. We need to move those to a date and time certain, so if someone would make a motion to that effect.
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Kempton. I move to continue files V0018-19 and V0022-19 to a date and time certain of November 26, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. and files V0023-19 to a date and time certain of December 5th, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. here at the County Administrative Building in this conference room.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to move these files, the three files mentioned, to date and time certain, both November 26th and December 5th. Is there a second to that motion?
Commissioner Reed, I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. All in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Motion carries. So those three cases are taken off the agenda tonight and put on those aforementioned agenda dates. Thank you.
So, was anyone here specifically for those variances?
All right, so that does take us then to the remaining file on the agenda at 5:30, which is file AM0. I did that. Okay, we're just going through the procedure again, asking again for anybody who needs any help who's participating or any conflicts of interest on these cases, in this case. Anyway. So file AM0007-19, amendment to text, Bonner County Revised Code Title 12. And as the procedure says, the staff will give a presentation on the case.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners, staff, and public. Pleasure to be here this evening. The Planning and Zoning Commission has conducted a work session on this topic and has talked about it previously on the best way to address recreational vehicles in Bonner County. I just wanted to take just a minute. We could spend hours on this topic right here. I wanted to just show how the zoning ordinance is guided. The Board of County Commissioners appoint the Planning and Zoning Commission, who are charged by state statute to create a comprehensive plan for the county. Back in 2005, the land use section of the comprehensive plan was updated. And then in 2008, the zoning ordinance for Bonner County was updated to become compliant with the comprehensive plan. So that's how the zoning ordinance is informed. It's informed by the comprehensive plan. Ordinance changes need to show that they are compliant with that plan. Currently, in Bonner County, a property owner is allowed maximum residential density of 1 dwelling unit per minimum lot size. So if you are in an R5 zone, 5-acre zone, you're allowed 1 dwelling unit. If you're in a AF20 zone, agricultural forest 20-acre minimum, you're allowed 1 dwelling unit per minimum lot size. And you see the definition for a dwelling unit there: space within a building providing complete independent living facilities for one family only. So when somebody comes in and asks us what's the density allowed on my property, this is what they're told. For a single family dwelling unit, you can have 1 on that property. If a person has a 20-acre parcel in a R5 zone, they can have up to 3 residences on that property. In the early 70s and 80s, the ordinance did not allow an ADU, but allowed a guest home, 600 square foot, no kitchen, 2-bedroom guest home. on every property. That ordinance changed, and the ordinance now allows a dwelling unit, accessory dwelling unit called an ADU, permitted in all zones except the industrial. There's a section of the code 12-490 that talks about ADU standards. And either one guest home or one accessory dwelling is permitted per lot or parcel. So the density allowed on a piece of property in Bonner County is one single-family dwelling and one ADU. If somebody came to the county and wanted to put an RV on their property or a tiny home and call that a single-family dwelling or an ADU and got a building location permit for that, we would permit that as a permanent structure at their request. Currently, recreational vehicles are permitted in all zones except industrial. The occupancy of a recreational vehicle on a lot or parcel shall not exceed 120 days in any consecutive 12-month period, not including RV parks. Recreational vehicle occupancy is limited to one such vehicle per lot or parcel. So you can have a home and an ADU and one RV on your property, but you can only stay in that RV for 120 days. Now, with the exception of what I said earlier, that if the RV is permitted as a permanent structure, being a single-family dwelling or an ADU, we would allow that person to live in that RV permanently, because it changes from this definition to a permanent residential structure. It changes from an RV to an ADU. So that's the way that RVs are permitted. The challenge with this ordinance is the diversity throughout the county. We have, I've been told we have more shoreland than even Maui. We have a lot of property that has shorelines, and so lakefront, and so and rivers. So we have lots of concern from folks about where RVs are allowed to go. We also have lots of property that are large acre parcels. We have folks that want to come up and build on their property and live in an RV while they build on their property. Personally, I have been considering that option as well. The challenge is the ordinance says 120 days. The other challenge with this ordinance is it says occupancy shall not exceed 120 days. That's really hard to verify. And so staff has been discussing this with the Planning and Zoning Commission on the best way to address this ordinance. And so we've seen several iterations of how this should be, and I wanted to point out that we had originally made some changes that you saw in orange, and then if you're following on the ordinance that's here, there's some new language proposed that's written in blue. But the first proposal is to eliminate this sentence completely, eliminating the restriction of 120 days on a parcel for an RV. The second sentence, recreational vehicle occupancy is limited to one such vehicle per lot or parcel. We tried to put together something that would allow, that would indicate that permanent RV use is allowed. And the Planning Commission talked about what is the best way to address this and determined that allowing 2 permanent RV spaces on the property would be the most appropriate way to address this. Now, we've had some comments, a phone call or two suggesting that this language needed to be adjusted as well. And so that sentence was rewritten to read, each lot or parcel is limited to 2 permanent accessory RV parking spaces. Standards in Bonner Revised Code 12-496 shall apply. Temporary, meaning less than a year, or intermittent use of an RV does not apply. See accessory RV parking space definition. The point of this change, and in discussion in the work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission, the discussion was there was not an interest in limiting temporary use on a property. Again, because of the difficulty on how to enforce and follow up on that. And so we thought that, staff thought that leaving that out would take care of that, but we had comments asking us to define specifically temporary use as not being a part of this code, which is fine, it's there. No problem there. Now, what is an accessory RV parking space? So, what the ordinance is concerned about in the comprehensive plan, following the comprehensive plan, is the location of a permanent structure on a property. It must meet setbacks, not just setbacks from property lines, but there are setbacks from wetlands, there are setbacks from rivers, there are setbacks from the lake. There are setbacks, there's not setbacks, but there are regulations on building in FEMA floodplains and floodways. And so there's regulations regarding those things that need to be followed. FEMA is the floodplain regulations that the federal government has us enforce. So the idea was that we would identify we would allow a property owner to identify 2 permanent RV parking spaces on their property. The concern in the discussion in the work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission was, should it be on an established pad or not? And the agreement was that it should not be does not have to be on an established pad or inside a structure. It can be inside a structure if somebody chose to put it inside a structure. But we needed something to indicate permanency. And so typical with that, one would assume that if it was permanent, that it would have electrical, water, and sewer to that permanent structure. But I understand. I grew up in an area with lots and lots of 40-acre parcels. And I understand living off-grid, electrical can be provided through solar or wind. There was actually commercial wind where I came from. Water and sewer hookups, water can be hauled, sewer can be addressed in lots of different ways. Panhandle Health has regulations that allow the sewer to be addressed in lots of different ways. So we took out the word hookups to clarify that, and we added the words which may be complete. So it doesn't have to have electrical, water, sewer hookups. It may be complete with those hookups. And it may be on an established pad or inside a structure. The point is that if it's going to be a permanent location on a property, that the county would like to verify those setbacks meet the code that's already in place. Understand that this is a loosening of the code. The ordinance currently only allows 1 home and 1 ADU on the property. This change will allow 2 RV parking spaces on the property, which has the potential to increase the density on that parcel. There are concerns that were brought up in the comments received about sewer and water, the impact on septic tanks. We, the county, choose to leave those responsibilities to the property owner. The property owner is responsible for taking care of those permits with Panhandle Health for sewer. We leave that to them. If their septic system is at capacity and they want to add 2 parking spaces on their property, they will need to work with Panhandle Health to fix that. To address that is the appropriate word. The county does not get involved in that discussion. So we went further to try and clarify what an accessory RV parking space is. Just to clarify how it will be addressed. The RV use is limited to 2 permanent RV parking spaces per lot or parcel, if you're gonna have a second RV spot, would require a minimum of 1 acre. Again, we're talking about density. We're talking about 4 residential living structures on a property. And so 1 acre, the impacts to that property, are they being properly addressed? So, access, roads, sewer, water, can that property handle 4 permanent residential living structures on that parcel? So, that's why the minimum of 1 acre is there for 2. Each RV parking space requires a building location permit. We have talked about staff changing that building to RV location permit. Thank the newspaper for that suggestion. An RV location permit would be more appropriate. It would be less fees. It would not require 2 inspections like currently for a building location permit requires 2 inspections. An RV location permit would likely only require 1 because all we're checking is setbacks to verify that those setbacks are met. We occasionally find when we go to a property that when they stake out the property, they've staked out a place that ends up being inside the setbacks. And so folks have to move their homes, and they have to move the locations of their homes and their ADUs. That is why we verify setbacks. So it has to meet all residential building setbacks. Now, I'm very familiar with the Forest Service property and state property. And so we felt that it would be appropriate to lessen the setbacks up against those property lines. Now, we've not received any comments from the Forest Service or the State Land Department concerned about those setbacks. So I'm pleased with that. I think, again, that a property owner needs to be responsible and needs to look at is that appropriate and does that fit with their plans? There are parts of this county that areas are checkerboarded, and it would be appropriate to allow the lessening of that setback. Each RV parking space, they can be inside a garage or under a snow roof. The permit would be there would not be double permits. If somebody wanted to permanently park and use an RV inside a garage or under a snow roof, that would be the permit they get. There would not be double permits, only 1. Shall not be used as a vacation rental. That's currently in the code, BCRC 12484. When the board adopted the vacation rental ordinance a couple years ago, that regulation was put in place. Now, understand, that's talking about, when that says shall not be used as a vacation rental, it's talking about the use of the RV. The ordinance also says that if a person rents out 2 RV parking spaces, it's considered an RV park. And so in the definition section of an RV park, the ordinance says an RV park is renting 2 or more spaces. So that's where that's addressed. RV parks and campgrounds. Again, this is a challenging code because it's interesting that an RV park currently is only allowed in a commercial zone or a rural service center zone, a recreation zone, or an alpine village, which is Schweitzer Mountain. The properties that are zoned commercial, it just seems that an RV park would be appropriate in the rural or the agricultural forest zones. So as the Planning and Zoning Commission discussed this in their work session, they talked about what standards would be appropriate. So let me see if I can try and explain how this works. A conditional use permit does not mean that a use is allowed outright. It does not mean that the use is absolutely permitted, that somebody can do that. They have to apply for a conditional use permit. That permit requires a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission, a notice to the neighbors, and allows for comments from agencies to review that permit application. So, the conditional use permit process seemed like a reasonable solution to allowing RV parks in the agricultural, forest, and rural zones, because the conditional use permit process requires that the conditional use permit is in compliance with the comprehensive plan. So staff does an analysis of the application that the person turns in, the property owner turns in, to make sure that it complies with the comprehensive plan. This is another reason for the importance of the comprehensive plan. As the county is out working with sub-areas, creating sub-area comprehensive plans, that's the urgency and the importance of those plans, is it helps to identify where uses such as this may be located. I don't know that I need to go through all of the reg standards or regulations for an RV park or campground. Some of the key points is it talks about the design and the density of the RV park. It limits it to 5 units per acre. It allows the opportunity for 100% campground to meet that as well. So a person could ask for 5 units per acre and 5 campsites per acre on their property. The challenge that any applicant is going to have with an RV park and a campground is utilities. Everywhere in this county, somebody comes and asks, what can I do with property? The challenge always is going to be, how do you address the utilities, the sewer and the water? And so there are limitations by those. While 5 units per acre may seem like a big number, it's not, because again, as you start to address sewer and water, there are limitations to that. As it starts to grow, the number of units start to grow, it becomes more restricted by the ability to address sewer and water. So along with that, you see the RV parks greater than 25 units shall follow the standards of the PUD ordinance. That's because above 25 units, it becomes a little more complicated for development. So a little more review. So again, yards and spacing, you see the access needs to be on roads, parking, all of these standards have to be addressed in the application to the Planning and Zoning Commission. You notice the words may be associated. They can have other uses participating with that. Provisions for vehicle, bicycle, pedestrian, where it says shall be integrated. So they shall consider that. Now think about that. We're talking about a roadway that's wide enough to allow for a vehicle, but also allows for a bicycle or pedestrian. Doesn't have to be intense to be able to handle those types of, that type of traffic. So it can be a gravel road. So there are ways to address these things. May indicates that it may or may not be there. Shall requires that they have to have those things in place. So I think that the Planning and Zoning Commission worked diligently on this, and the recommendations that came up with this, I think are well thought through. They meet the intent of the comprehensive plan. The site plan is something that they would also submit. It would need to show these things. It doesn't have to be professionally drawn. It can be drawn by hand by applicant. So there is no requirement for professional drawings for these things. It can be done individually. I stated these things, that conditional use permits required, public hearing required, notice to the neighbors. It must not conflict with the comprehensive plan. There's the code in the ordinance 12-223 that the conditional use permit has to comply with the comprehensive plan. So again, we had an application 6 months ago for basically a tiny home resort in a recreation zone. It's a permitted, or it's not a permitted, it's a conditional use. Neighbors came to the meeting and asked for certain requirements. The Planning and Zoning Commission denied the application. Those things do happen. Not everything gets approved. We had comments from agencies on this. City of Kootenai suggested that 2 RVs per property is against the densities established in the comprehensive plan. In my review of this application against the comprehensive plan, there is nowhere in the comprehensive plan that talks about densities. It talks about lot size minimums. So it talks about a lot size minimum of 5 to 10 acres or a lot size of 10 to 20 acres. It doesn't talk about the number of residential structures allowed on a property. Concern about the impact allowing RV parks and campgrounds would have in the area, city impact. We are currently in the process of working with the cities. I sent them an email or letter asking them to consider revisiting the area city impact agreements so we can further and better address these. I've not received any response from any of the cities. And so I suspect that at some point they may become interested enough to want to address that. Currently, we do notify them for conditional use permit applications in the area of city impact. And occasionally we receive comments on those applications, but it is the county's final decision on how to address those concerns. So we received comment from Panhandle Health. Again, you have the 3-page letter in your packet. I'm not going to go over that. In Bonner County Revised Code 12-333, it lists a number 8, and it says adequate water supplies for drinking, fire suppression, as well as approval of sewage disposal sites and methods by PhD or the state of Idaho must be demonstrated as appropriate. Panhandle Health brought this up as they didn't understand what adequate meant or appropriate. I guess my thought was that if they reviewed the conditional use permit, they also get routed on these and participate in that. They have the opportunity to provide comment that a permit has been applied for and it will meet the needs of that. So my recommendation, reviewing that letter again, is to delete this sentence, feeling that it was addressed appropriately up here under water and sewer. So it's part of the application. An applicant has to provide proof of where wastewater drain field areas. They have to meet with Panhandle Health in order to determine where those locations are. So my recommendation in the draft you have in front of you is to remove that sentence. So in my staff report, I put quite an extensive analysis of the comprehensive plan. I read through the goals and policies in the implementation section of the comprehensive plan and tried to address each of those standards as it relates to this ordinance change. There was no public comment received written. There was lots of talk about this. Like I said, I accepted phone calls and I discussed this with individuals on recommended changes. I think we tried to implement nearly every suggestion that was brought to us. In the draft that you have before us, it indicates those changes. So staff would recommend approval of this, recommend forwarding this to the commissioners with a recommendation of approval.
Okay, thank you. So, any questions at this point from the commissioners to the staff?
Commissioner Brash, Milton, it's hard to believe that you didn't get any comment from the IDL Forest Service. Did you send letters to both the city office and the cooling office?
I don't know the answer to that. We do send out to all the taxing districts, so, and we do send out comment, request for the agency list.
Yeah, usually you give us the agency list, and it's not on our.
Yeah, we did send it out to the state lands. It may have just been the local, I'm not sure if it went to Cooling as well.
That could really affect Priest Lake and just neighbor conflicts in general, having 5-foot setbacks beside lands that are managed for industrial forestry purposes.
But again, that's property owner, right?
Any other questions for staff?
I got one.
Milton, on the definition, make sure I have the right one. Accessory RV parking space, a permanent RV parking space which may be complete with electrical, water, sewer hookups, may or may, or might be the wrong one. May or may not be on established pattern inside a structure. An open field definitely fits that definition, because it may or may not have electric, water, sewer, and may not have a pad or an inside structure.
Right.
That's only the comment I have is, I don't know if that can be massaged at all, or maybe I'm not understanding that correctly.
What are you wanting it to say, or what do you think it should say?
Well, basically, an open field qualifies an accessory RV parking space with that definition.
It does. We're asking that it be indicated with stakes or something showing, showing that it's, I mean, we would ask that as part of the RV location. Correct. But you're right, it could technically be, the purpose though is to somehow indicate permanency.
Other questions for staff at this point? No more questions. So, that concludes the staff presentation, so now we'll open it up to public testimony. So, if again, you desire to come up, would you make your way up to the podium one at a time? Try as hard as you can to observe the 3-minute rule. And also, I mean, this has been great so far. It's been very orderly. Thank you very much. Let's see if we keep it that way during testimony. Someone's gonna say something that you like. I don't wanna hear applause or cheers or anything, or if somebody says something you don't like, I don't wanna hear boos or whatever. That's disorderly conduct in this proceeding. So, let's see if we proceed that way, and we'll see if we keep it in control. All right? So, anyone who would like to come up to the podium, please start your way up there and give us your name and address for the record, and let us know what's on your mind.
Hi, my name is Ken Norris, and my address is 280 Rustic Way, Spirit Lake. I'm questioning why we're permitting vehicles. I thought that was state's proprietary. I mean, and I'm coming at it from a perspective is, I've had my property for sale for a little while. And on that property, I have an RV. And my realtor said, why don't we try and sell your RV at the same time? And the title company came back and said, you're not allowed to do that. Which means an RV should not be a permanent part of any property. It's kind of inherent in the title, it's a vehicle. So as a landowner,
We'll make a note.
I'm asking, could you consider maybe not trying to stick me for a little more money? I'd appreciate it.
So, what we're gonna do with these, any question that's raised, staff's writing it down, we're writing it down.
All right.
We'll give the staff, time. Particularly this one, we
Right.
certainly have discussed that in the context of the tiny homes issue.
Uh-huh.
Because it comes down to the same thing, is it real property, is it not? It's,
Understandable.
so we'll, if you would allow us in the response.
Absolutely. I would also like to say to all of you, thank you for listening to us, the public, and trying, obviously, very diligently to come up with something that meets both of our needs. That means a lot to me as a member of this county.
And that's exactly why we're here. This is a public process, so we don't.
Thank you.
We're not so smart that we can figure it all out with everybody's comments.
I did notice one of the considerations was a 5-foot setback from state lands. If I'm not mistaken, the state on occasion will do a land swap with private entities such as Stimson or other lumber companies. Is that correct?
That's been known.
Should that happen, would that 5-foot setback suddenly change and cause a landowner to be out of compliance?
That's a good question.
Because of a deal made that they may most likely been aware of?
Okay, that'll be look for a response from staff on that.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you for testing. Okay, anyone else? Patty?
Michael Gully, live on Lower Manly Creek Road in Laclede. Many people come to Idaho for the freedoms and liberties they believe exist here. Idaho is seen as one of the few remaining places a family can purchase raw land, set up their homestead, and begin the process of development while they live on the land they own. When I first looked for land to purchase in Bonner County, I actually specifically passed on some properties with CC&Rs, which specified how long I could live in an RV while I built a house. I'm building in cash, not with loans, and so I knew it would take me more than a year to build a traditional home. The rhetorical question I want everyone to consider tonight is this: is securing for yourself and family a home for shelter and safety on your own land a right or a liberty, or is it a privilege which is not afforded to all property owners? The writers of our Constitution seem to presume that people had homes or shelters when they wrote the Bill of Rights. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, etc. The presumption is that people had houses. The Constitution of the State of Idaho says in Article 1, Section 1, Inalienable Rights of Man, all men are by nature free and equal and have certain inalienable rights, among which are enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, pursuing happiness, and securing safety. How can one secure safety on the property they own if they cannot provide the basic necessity of shelter for them and their family? Remember the rhetorical question I wanted you all to consider tonight. Is it securing for yourself and family a shelter and safety on your own land a right, or is it a liberty, or is it a privilege which is not afforded to all property owners? There are actually 2 U.S. Supreme Court cases, Shuttleworth versus City of Birmingham, 1963. If the state converts a right or liberty into a privilege, the citizen can ignore the license and fee and engage in the right liberty with impunity. Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, 1943. No state shall convert a right into a license and charge a fee therefor. As private property owners, we should not need to apply for the county's permission or permit to secure for ourselves and our families safety in the form of shelter on our property. RVs do serve as shelter and provide safety from the elements as well as local wildlife. Of course, within a pro-private property rights regime, individuals need the ability to exclude others from the use and benefits of their own private property. Beyond the right of acquiring property, there is also the right of sole dominion, as also described as the right to exclude others, a right against trespass, or a right of quiet enjoyment, which all can exercise equally at the same time, and also the right of active use, at least to the point where such use violates the rights of others to quiet enjoyment. Just where that point is will vary depending on the facts, of course, and that makes it the business of courts to determine. It's good for legislators, federal, state, and county to draw the broad outlines for that. Given our current permitting regime, however, the point to be noticed here is that I am instead advocating for free use of private property. People should not be required to obtain a permit or permission before using their property. That is, just as people today are not required to obtain a permit before speaking. Rather, the burden should be on those who object to a given use to show how it violates a right of theirs. This amounts to having to show that their neighbor's use takes something they own free and clear. If they fail to show that, the use should continue. So what I'm advocating for is the right of active use of our own private properties without needless regulations, permits, and code enforcement, at least to the point where such use violates the rights of others. In other words, I'm asking for a county which upholds the rights of private property owners to use their property freely until they actually encroach on the property rights of others, as opposed to a county which attempts to defend private property rights through permits, fees, and policing. As such, I'm requesting the removal of Note 11 from Bonner County Revised Code 12332, no creation of a 12801 definition, and no creation of a section 12496. And just to be clear, I am not addressing the regulation of commercial RV parks in that. Thank you.
Please, none of that, please. I know you're in agreement, but I don't want to hear that. If it happens again, I'm going to be pointing at people, and I'm going to ask you to leave. Is that clear? Thank you. Next person to testify.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't get that last gentleman.
Mike Gully,
Mike?
I believe.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, my name is Tracy Roberts. My address is 600 Camelot Lane, East River, Idaho. I want to initially say thank you very much. I do realize that the Planning Commission is listening to us and that they are trying to work with us, and we very much appreciate that. I also want to echo Mike's comments that what I'm remarking here is only about the residential changes, the amendment that we're talking about. So I've got two different things I'd like to discuss. The first part is we as a group of affiliated people who know each other through the county have come up with a petition. It's very informal. We circulated among ourselves to see how much support we had for our position on this. I won't read you the whole petition. I will read the last little summary statement, and I'll let you know that we had 198 signatures gathered in the course of about 7 days on that, just to give an idea of what sort of support our statements have here. So the basic summary was that we consider this type of administrative action to be recursive and would only increase the tax burden for the citizens of the county. Rather than implement the changes proposed in AN 0007-19, we propose the removal of Note 11 from BCRC 12-332 and recommend a more reasonable and mutually beneficial amendment to the BCRC elements that relate to the use of recreational vehicles in a commercial setting to be proposed at a future date. So that was what they came up with as a group regarding this petition. I would also go further and personally say that, and echoing again Mr. Gully's statements, many of us here are looking for less regulation, not more regulation. We came here to this county, or hopefully a lot of people were born here and have the joy and pleasure and privilege of living here your whole lives. And we appreciate that it's a free place. It's a place that's known for its liberty. We had a meeting just a couple of weeks ago with one of the county commissioners. He told us that he is actively working and that you guys are actively working to reduce the already bloated and cumbersome county code. And we appreciate that, and that's what we want to see. So we would like to see less code, not more. We would like to see Note 11 completely removed and not add any additional regulation, no additional definitions, no additional standards to be complied with. Secondly, we want to point out that if the people do want more regulation on the use of recreational vehicle, specifically it sounds like you're trying to contain it as the occupancy as a full-time residential dwelling unit. The language that you proposed here is not clear. The terms of the use of a parking space, when you're talking about a vehicle, that becomes very unclear. It sounds like Milton already said that you have process to turn an RV into a permanent dwelling unit. We can continue with that process without having to add additionals. The terms of saying a parking space is unclear. The word of the use of a recreational vehicle is very unclear. Recreational vehicle can be used as a recreational vehicle, as a temporary shelter, as a chicken house, as a permanent dwelling. It's too ambiguous. So we would ask, again, that we not add anything to the code at this time, certainly not until you can get much more clear and precise language. And overall, we would like to see less regulation. Strike note 11, do not add anything more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next.
Sandy Nicholson, West Pine Street, Dover. I have a clarifying question really quick for you, Milton. Is what you presented today the same that was online a couple days ago? It looks a little bit different.
It's a little bit different.
Okay. So, and then another clarifying question is what you're proposing essentially with the RVs, I think on the residential, essentially to double what is already allowed?
1 to 2.
1 to 2, okay. So my question for you is, and with respect to each of you and your individual property rights, the preamble to the Constitution also calls for us to oversee our posterity. And for me, that is our soil, our water, our air, things like that for our children, for future generations, and for the whole community. And so I just have one question for planning and zoning to please consider, and I do appreciate all your consideration. And that is, how are you measuring the cumulative effects of doubling what it already is? And when we live in a data-driven society, what are the qualifications of who you're using to get those cumulative effect reports to you? That's what I would ask you to consider in doubling what is already allowed.
Thank you.
Nobody clapped for
And,
real.
yeah, were you
Yes.
on your way?
Yes,
Okay.
I was.
There you go.
So I'm Catherine Kohlberg, I'm with Panhandle Health District. I did submit a letter in response to the request for comments from the county. I would like people to know that Panhandle Health is really just a neutral party in this conversation. The main point I would like people to understand is that we would like to be an effective part of this conversation. The main thing that Panhandle Health is here for is to manage the wastewater disposal that occurs, especially as Bonner County is growing and developing. So any type of regulations that are revolving around wastewater disposal are at the state level at this point. Like I said, Panhandle Health is neutral in regards to this specific issue, other than we really do want people to understand that we want to be a part of the conversation. And we're here, we've got a ton of options for wastewater disposal. You could have dry RVs, or you could have RVs that have water to them. And just because an RV has a water source doesn't mean they necessarily have to have an on-site wastewater disposal system on that parcel. But they do need to dispose of their wastewater in a fashion that is allowed by the state. So I do really appreciate this conversation, and I'm really grateful that the Bonner County is including all of us agencies and all of you citizens in this conversation. So if anybody has questions about any of this, please feel free to contact our office. We're not here to direct the growth in one way or the other, but we just want to handle the wastewater disposal in a way that protects the drinking water and the surface water that we all enjoy around here. So,
Thank you, Ms. Goldberg. All right, next.
Sorry, I just needed a clarification. My name is Ken Myers, I'm from Sago. And I wasn't quite sure on, when you're talking at point A on accessory recreational vehicle parking space, and you have 2 permanent accessory spaces per lot there, and then you have that below it, a second accessory RV park. Does that mean within a unit or a parcel, you could have 4 units? You could only have 2?
Correct.
So when accessory RV parking space requires a minimum of 1 acre, that means, you're meaning that your RV has to have 1 acre?
That means if you're gonna have two, you have to have a minimum of 1 acre to have two spots.
Great, thank
If
you.
you have less than an acre, you can only have one.
Okay. And a question, other question I had was, a clarification again, in the, when you're talking about, RV parking spaces, and you're saying which may, complete with electrical, water, and sewage hookups, and you cross out hookups with sewer. To control that, would those people who are going to put on an RV spot have to have, Panhandle Health approval of the waste disposables that they're using or
I
giving out?
believe that is their regulation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. My name is Todd Keppel. I'm from 464436 US 95 in Sagal. And my understanding what prompted this amendment to the code was the idea that to control use of an RV on a property for more than 120 days or whatever was ridiculous. And to say that it's unenforceable is not the same thing as saying it's wrong. And I believe it is wrong. All that this change does is change 120 days really to a 1 year, which I don't see how monitoring or measuring for 1 year is any different than monitoring or measuring for 120 days. Because once you cross the line going from less than a year to more than a year, you now move into the permanent requirement. So all you've done is shift the goalpost from 120 days to 1 year. And then the definition of an accessory RV space is no definition at all. There's so much may or may nots in here that it really means nothing. As the commissioner over here mentioned, it's so ambiguous. It's ambiguous enough to where there's no clear definition of what a permanent RV parking space is. And so, as I understand it, the only thing that makes sense based on the intent of this amendment in the first place is again to strike note 11 completely, which is the intent that as I understood it. Not add the definition 12801, not add the definition of 12-496. None of these things are in alignment with the intended purpose of bringing this amendment up in the first place.
Thank you. Who wants to speak next? Anyone else want to say something? Yes, sir.
Beat him, run.
Who gets there first?
Grace Bauer, 81 Kuskanik Loop, City of Kootenai. Also, I want to bring up a good point that Commissioner Bradish brought up, that there was in fact agency comment. The City of Kootenai, which I am on the Kootenai City Council, responded to the Planning and Zoning Commission's proposed amendments, and we did oppose them. However, this feels like a little bit of a bait and switch because there were amendments to the amendments, which are very vague and arbitrary. And one question, point of clarification I have is, when you make an amendment to the amendment after you've already posted to the public on a public hearing, don't you have to repost the new amendments and set the hearing for a different date?
That's a good question.
Only if the P&Z Commission chooses to accept those amendments. Those amendments have been forwarded to the board for another public hearing. If there were no changes made to the original document, then the board doesn't necessarily have to hold a public hearing. But if the P&Z Commission accepts those changes, so those changes are meant for the Planning Commission. If the Planning Commission chooses to accept or reject those, that's up to them this night. Then those changes are then forwarded to the board.
Also, I believe in Robert's Rules of Order allows the commission to make text amendments at the public hearing, but I disagree with Mr. Ollerton's analysis. Also, I just wanted to say personally, I think that note 11 should be stricken, and the blue heart that was added and not posted for the public to comment on should go away as well. The reason the city of Kootenai was originally opposed to these changes had to do with the water and sewer hookups. The Kootenai-Ponderay Sewer District is almost at full capacity, and when you increase density, then we're facing a $28 million upgrade to our facility. So that's going to be a tax burden on the people in Kootenai and Ponderay if our density gets pushed. So anyway, those are my thoughts. And also, I think before you guys vote on this, which I hope you guys postpone the latter text, is the first gentleman made a very good point about RVs, and doesn't the state regulate that? Thank you.
Okay, let's see, yes, sir, you were way on the wing.
My name is Alex Keppel. I am from Highway 95 in Athol, Idaho. We've heard some very good, strong reasons why the proposed changes are not only wrong, but also unenforceable, with the exception of the eliminating the 180 or 120 day limitation that is necessary. But note 11 should be stricken out. No creation of a 12801 definition, and no creation of section 12496. I would also like to express my wish that the RVs can be used as vacation rentals, because as I understand it, it is not permissible to rent out one, but if you rent out two, you are now a campground. Now, if you're not allowed to rent out one, that means that you can't even rent out one without becoming a campground. And why shouldn't someone be allowed to rent out an RV to someone? How is them renting it out, one RV to someone without getting a campground license, how is that different than them deciding to live in it or let their son live in it or something? Like Thomas Jefferson said, it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. So why shouldn't my neighbor be allowed to do that? The only other request I would make is that the board here please consider mild, nonverbal signs of affirmation, such as applause, as long as no one is trying to talk, to consider that free speech and not disruptive, because most of the time when someone is speaking and someone gives a little applause, that does not disrupt the meeting, as long as no one is trying to talk. So I would request that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
I like that guy.
My name is Carmen Corritoro, and I live at 88 Hawksridge Lane in Priest River. And I don't have anything prepared, but what I wanted to say is I personally believe, and I think based on comments and stuff that I read on Facebook and other media, social media, is that most people who move to Idaho want less county regulation. And we're not saying we're not gonna follow state regulations, because those have already been put out, there's nothing you can do about it. Or federal regulations, because there we're stuck. But like, we shouldn't add to things and make it worse instead of better. And I think by trying to define, instead of just getting rid of it, like what everybody said already in here, from what I understood, you guys wanted to get rid of that note 11. So if you wanna get rid of it, don't add any more stuff. And I think because of fear of somebody calling you up and going, blah, 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 cause I don't like whatever my neighbor's doing, well, it's the neighbor's property, it's not your property. So it's like, you know, put a hedge up, don't look at it kind of thing. You know, instead of making, like, so you don't need to please everybody. You shouldn't need to please anybody. You know, if I don't wanna look when I'm driving down Spirit Lake Cutoff at stuff, then I just go right by. I mean, it's all I'm saying. And I saw this introduction to the zoning and subdivision ordinance on Boundary County, and I actually don't think this should be put onto just the zoning and subdivision, but I think on possibly the Bonner County website, and if you need help, I'll help, or I'm sure there's other people with bigger words than me. But if you make like a letter of introduction, say, hey, this is Bonner County, the people of Bonner County, we the people, like to live this certain way, and, you know, you're gonna be on dirt roads, and maybe there's no electricity, and maybe your neighbor lives in a trailer, and maybe you won't like it. Well, come and visit before you move here. Don't buy without sight unseen, and if you don't like it, don't move. But say that in a nice way. I'm sure there's gotta be a nicer way than this, but all I'm saying is look at what another county in Idaho did, that I personally, if I would have seen this, I'm like, yes, because I moved here from California, but I actually moved here from Romania, and I lived in Romania when it was communist, and there were no freedoms. So for me to even be able to speak is kind of scary, especially around grown-ups, because they could make you disappear. And so that's nice not to have that issue. So it'd be nice not to have more control. Like, let's not nitpick, just get rid of it all completely, leave it alone, and if somebody has a problem, say, dude, there's a lot of trees, buy a tree. You know, move a tree, hide. That's all, you know, and maybe put that in front of everybody, you know, just on the website, because that's where people look, but in a nice way. Anyway, that's it.
Anyone else want to add comments? Anyone else?
Yeah, I will.
Something
for touched on.
Okay.
My name's Adrian Norris. Many of you already know me on Facebook. You don't necessarily know who I am, but here I am, and I'm here to say to the council, to the committee, a lot of good points were put out on both sides. You know, Kootenai, they had a lot of valid points. Panhandle Health had a lot of points. But I think we need to remember one thing. We're already governed by RV, okay? When it was in the manufacturer's facility, it was dictated by whoever governed it to say it's a safe vessel, or whatever you want to call it, unit, whatever. When it leaves and goes to someone's property or drives down the road, then it's governed by the Department of Motor Vehicles, okay? Now, I understand that Title 63, I believe, in the state code enables you guys to charge personal property tax on an RV, a boat, whatever, once it is not titled with the Department of Transportation. I feel like you guys are wanting to put this into the codes, the building location codes, because then you can do an inventory on every RV that's in the county. Now, I'm pretty sure this is not your objective, but we need to think of long-term objectives, right? Isn't that why we have a Constitution of the United States that is not allowed to be changed? It's because of future understandings and verbiages and so forth. So we need to remember our Constitution when we try to apply these codes. Another thing I want to bring up is we already have state laws. We have state laws that, as we've already talked about, for sewage. Panhandle Health does a great job. They don't know if the 5%ers has an illegal septic system, and it's bad, but it's just like our gun rights, okay? Just because there's a few people shooting up schools and so forth, that doesn't mean I, as an American in a democracy, should lose my gun rights. And therefore, I shouldn't lose my rights to live how I want on my property because of the 5%ers. And it's very terrible what they're doing, but it's not my problem and it's not my fault. And if it is affecting a neighbor, meaning the sewage is leaking onto their property, or they're making loud noises, or whatever, or they're trespassing on the neighbor's property to access their RV or whatever structure because it's right on the property line, then that neighbor already has laws in place, trespassing laws, panhandle health laws. We even have laws for electrical and plumbing. So we don't need to double govern. We moved to Bonner County, we live in Bonner County for the freedoms that we thought were in place. So let's leave it alone and go on with our lives. The last thing I want to bring up is Carmen, I believe is her name. She had a wonderful point. I am the one that went up to Boundary County and I did some talking. I explained to them I'm not trying to turn the counties against each other, but I would like to know why Boundary County, Idaho County, and many other counties in Idaho have under their codes unregulated for RVs. Why is that? Is it because there's no other regulations that require you to regulate it? So we need to think about this before we start adding unreasonable codes that don't even need to be in place when there's already government facilities or agencies that are already doing the things that you guys are concerned about. Because to be honest, what I do on my property is my business, and what you do on your property is yours, until it becomes a safety or a health concern. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I'm Adrienne, and I live on Spirit Lake Cutoff.
And there was one more, yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lilian, and I'm from Sego. First of all, I want to thank all of you because I know you're doing all this to improve the way of life, to improve everything for the community. But I second what the gentleman Mike said and the rest of the people, that most of the people that we move from other places to this amazing place is because of the freedom, because we don't want to deal with all the control that the government has in this country and in other countries. And the reason that people here are so happy is because we are allowed to live the way we want. We are allowed to say what we want without being criticized for anybody. And I think that the control is getting too much, that it's becoming like a domino effect, that now everybody thinks that because in the cities they're controlling even the way you breathe, then we have to do it. And that's not the way it should be. And controlling how many people can have RVs in their, or how many RVs people can have in their land, I think is damaging the way of life. There are a lot of people that they have no money to pay for a house. The construction materials increase more than 400%, and stopping people from having more than 2 RVs, you will be damaging a lot of families that they don't have the money to buy the land for the first child, for the second child, for the 4th child. And then they're living in RVs, and when it's winter, they go to the south and get a job. So I think that controlling what people do in their houses and controlling how many people can live, you're gonna be damaging the housing. And as long as the county cannot build more affordable housing for the people, we cannot decide where they can live or where they cannot live. Because if you try to get a house or an apartment in this area, it is impossible, and if you find it, it's extremely expensive. So where are going to live all those persons who cannot afford a house? Where are we gonna put them? If Mr. Smith has 3 kids and he's gonna put 3 RVs for them because they cannot build a house, are we gonna tell them, sorry sir, I know it's your land, but I don't wanna see your RVs beside my land? We shouldn't just think about us, we should think about them. What are we gonna tell them? Are we gonna buy their house for them? We don't have the right, nor the county nor the cities. We cannot tell the people, you cannot live in your land, you cannot have another house in your land, because the housing is not affordable right now. And some people are worried about the sewage. Well, it's the same thing that if you build a house with 10 bedrooms because you have 10 kids, they're gonna use the same amount of water and sewage than if they live in a big house than if they live in 3 RVs. Some of the big houses in the lake, they spend more water than an RV can spend. So we have to think about that. Don't just think that, okay, I don't want to see an RV because, oh, it looks bad. We need to be empathetic. We need to be empathetic as council, as city, as people. That's why this country was great, because it was United States of America. You have to be united and not just see for what is convenient to you. We have to see what is convenient to most of the people and to be realistic. The housing is unaffordable in this area. To buy a house, to build a house, and to rent an apartment. So if you can, I think it's great that you have taken the time to change that 120 days. But I think that better than just change those 120 days, we shouldn't even be ruling how many RVs a person can have. If someone is renting 10 RVs in their land, okay, they have to start paying taxes, they have to be regulated. But if you're a person, you have 10 kids, and you want to have 10 RVs because you cannot build 10 houses, I don't think why we should regulate the way of that people, or where are we gonna put them? Are we gonna have them homeless? Those persons that they live in RVs, are we gonna have them homeless because now their dad can only have 2 RVs in their houses? So I just want you to remember the name of your country. I'm Mexican, and I admire this country, and just remember your name, United States of America. So you should start being united and not just go through the flow with a domino effect. Think about the neighbors, think about the reality of this country. There are a lot of poor people, there are a lot of homeless people, and we don't want the people from here to become homeless because their dad cannot afford to build a house. Thank you.
I heard the name Lillian, I didn't catch your last name.
That's fine.
No. All right, anyone else? Okay, no one else wants to say something, so we'll do now.
I think it's time for a stretch. Everybody wants to stand up and stretch. Please feel free.
Or,
the restrooms are located out there in the mass lobby to the right. So let's take a 5 or 6 minutes.